Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Now, after the devastating effects of Hurricane Sandy hit the US, many economists are unsure on what this will do to growth in the country. I'm joined once again by Dr. Frank Hollenbeck in the studio. Dr. Frank, thank you so much for coming into the studio again to talk to us.
You're welcome.
Now, many commentators have been saying that this devastating hurricane would lead to more construction, which would in turn to lead to better GDP growth. Now, would you agree with that?
Well, they're absolutely right that it's going to lead to more construction and repair work. However, they're making the mistake that it's unlikely to lead to higher GDP growth. If disasters were productive or led to higher GDP growth, then I say, why wait for the next disaster? Let's just create one. Let's bulldoze New York City and think about the amount of GDP growth that we would be able to generate. Okay? And this concept that disasters leads to growth is a popular misconception. A misconception that was dealt with back in the 19th century. Frederick Bastiat wrote an article in 1848, what is called broken window fallacy. And let me explain to you what the broken window fallacy is. Suppose that you break a window. You're going to call up the window repairman and you're going to pay him $100. Now, somebody looking at this is going to say, oh, this is good because it's spurring economic activity. In other words, everybody has to make a living. Suppose that no windows were broken, the window repairman wouldn't have any work, and he will take that $100 and he will spend it on other goods and services, creating employment for other sectors of the economy. Now, that is what is seen. What is not seen is the fact that if you had not paid him $100, you would have maybe purchased a new pair of shoes. And the $100 would have gone to the maker of the shoes. That is what is not seen. Now, if we look at the problem from society's point of view, when you break the window, we have $100 going to the window repairman, you have a window, and the shoe maker gets nothing. If you had not broken the window, then you end up with a window and a pair of shoes, okay? And instead, the $100 goes to the shoemaker. So society, if we consider society to be all three of you, society is definitely better off that you hadn't broken the window than you did. In other words, destruction doesn't lead to more growth than before.
So, Dr. Frank, what do you predict will happen now in the fourth quarter growth?
The empirical literature shows that the initial impact is for a reduction of growth. And my guess is that the more a disaster has destroyed the capital base, the lower the growth is. For example, Katrina destroyed a lot of the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico and destroyed a lot of the capital in the New Orleans area, and it had a significant negative impact on economic growth. Now, there have been several long-run studies on the impact of disasters on economic growth. The most cited is the Skidmore-Toyah study that looked at 89 countries over 30 years. They basically concluded that disasters related to climate, okay, tended to boost long-term economic growth because of what is known as Schumpeter's creative destruction, in the sense that a hurricane that wipes things off, we can basically rebuild using new technology and new innovations. They also showed that disasters like earthquakes tended to create negative long-term economic growth. My problem with these studies, again, is that what cannot be seen and what is never measured. So I would really be questionable about the positive impact of disasters on economic growth long term.
So lastly, Dr. Frank, how can we use the concepts that we've just been talking about and apply them to other economic pressures that are currently happening?
The mark of a good economist is not that he shows you what can be seen, but what cannot be seen. And a really good economist is one that shows you what can be foreseen. For example, Obama basically told us that the unemployment rate would have been much worse if the government hadn't spent all this money. What cannot be seen is that if the government had not spent that money, they wouldn't have borrowed the money, and therefore somebody else would have borrowed that money and would have invested it in buildings or capital equipment. Now, a good economist would have told you what can be foreseen, in the sense that this investment in building and equipment would have created probably more growth and employment than, for example, the cash for clunkers idea that we developed back after the crash of 2008. Now, we can also see it in trade. For example, we could have a policy that restricts Japanese automobiles into the U.S. Now, what can be seen is the fact that we would benefit the U.S. auto industry. Okay. What is not seen is that the Japanese, the reason they give us their goods and services, the metal that goes into the cars and the labor that went into the cars, is that they get paid with dollars. Okay. And those dollars are what? They're claims on goods and services. Now, the Japanese may turn around and give it to a sheik for his oil, but the reason the sheik is giving the oil is because ultimately he wants to purchase a U.S. product with it. So what is seen is the benefit we see to the auto industry. What is not seen is the fact that Boeing is unlikely to sell an export to maybe Saudi Arabia, as an example. Okay. What should be foreseen, though, is that by restricting Japanese sales of automobiles, we basically reduce the economic pie for everybody. Like the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the 1930s not only reduce imports, but they also reduce exports.
Dr. Frank, thank you once again for coming into the studio and sharing your insights, and I look forward to seeing you next week. That's all from us here in the Dukascopy studio, but just click back to the website for more interviews and updates.